Welcome to another episode of the Balancing Hormones Naturally podcast, where we offer actions and steps you can take today to start balancing your hormones naturally. This is your podcast host, Leah Brueggemann. I am a functional diagnostic nutritional practitioner. I am honored and excited to be your guide on your journey to better understanding your hormonal health and how it affects your everyday life. Hey ladies, welcome back to another episode. So we have two guests here. So Landon's going to be here. So if you hear random sound effects, it's Landon. I mean, it might be me, but it's probably Landon. And then we also have Stephanie Gahm on, who is a fellow graduate from FDN. And she specializes, I'll let you tell them what you specialize in. But in my mind, you do a lot with like mold and IC and bladder and all of that stuff. So I'd love if you can just introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your health journey, what got you started.
Awesome. Hi to all of Leah's listeners. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, you're totally on the right track. My personal health story has to do with IC and bladder issues. And so that's really like my soft spot, dealing with clients who struggle with that, because I feel like it's such a niche that doesn't get attention. But bigger picture, and I'm sure as we kind of chat, I'm going to spill my guts all about like mold and toxicity and all of that. That's really where I like to work, is helping people detox and remove those hidden stressors that really affect our health in a big picture.
Yeah. And I feel, well, it's one of those things, I think you attract what you kind of go through a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me a little bit about like the journey of coming back from all of that? Because I know it was not a short journey.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was, and when I look back at my own story and realize that I had just been teed up for this health crash, when you look back, and I know you have similar with your story too. When you look back at your history, even like childhood and your younger years, sometimes you can kind of see the little, the seeds or the breadcrumbs, and you can kind of piece together where things started. But yeah, I think I'd always kind of had what I called a tiny bladder. So I didn't struggle necessarily with incontinence, but just like feeling like I had to pee. I was the one on the road trip that was always like, oh, I have to stop and pee. So that was kind of just always a bladder awareness for me, but I didn't get my first actual UTI bladder infection until I was postpartum with my second baby. And I got a UTI, and that kind of just began a few years of off and on like recurring UTIs. And so knowing what I know now is, gosh, if one round of antibiotics doesn't always cure it, heal it, fix it, a lot of times a round of antibiotics can put it at bay and can recur and come back. So that's what happened for me, is over the years, I finally got hit with like a terrible, terrible version of what I think was probably the same UTI that had just come back and forth for a few years. And I don't know if it became antibiotic resistant or if my body was just like, we're done. So it took me months and months and months of seeing all the specialists, all the, urologists. I even saw a functional medicine doctor. I was at the ER so many times, and people just give you all the antibiotics and send you on your way. Pain meds and antibiotics is really all they know to do. And so it was a really scary, confusing journey for me. And it wasn't until I found somebody who used muscle testing and a lot of detoxification practices to kind of basically reduce my toxin bucket, that analogy, right? But that's how I kind of found my way out of that really awful. It was I say it was a majority of a year where I was super miserable and sick.
I mean, I, knock on wood, have not had a bladder infection.
Good. May you
Kind of
never.
want to keep it that way
Yeah.
because you hear about them. I'm like, that's horrible. So I can't imagine fighting that on and off like for an entire year.
It was
That's
awful.
painful. Um, I love muscle testing. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So, is that what made you want to go on to become a functional practitioner?
Yes.
Because you're like,
Yes.
I need this.
In fact, just looking at the body from the big picture of, oh my gosh, like we function as a whole, troubleshooting the bladder and, you troubleshooting, even just troubleshooting a hormone here and there, like
Mhm.
that's not enough. You have to look at the whole picture, the whole body.
Yeah.
And that's what made me get better. And so, yeah, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to be able to help others. So yeah, that's when I went back to school to go through the FDN program that I know you went through, and just kind of learning all the ways to support others through it too.
Yeah. It's kind of that whole body approach. So like as you've been working with clients through this, um, have you like what are some like could we talk about IC a bit and some root
Yes.
causes? Because I think a lot of times, they're told like take D-mannose or, take an antibiotic, another antibiotic, and you're like, why is this still going on?
Yeah, I feel like there's two camps. I feel like doctors either treat you like you have a UTI and they just want to slam you with antibiotics all the time, which, I'm a fan of using antibiotics if you need them, but just taking them willy-nilly, you're gonna get antibiotic resistance. And if you end up taking some of these antibiotics that are, like I think of like the category of like floxins, those are black box. Like those have severe effects. It's a big deal. So you don't want to just be taking one every time you get a UTI. That's not the best way to treat it. So I feel like there's kind of that category, but then there's another category of doctors who diagnose you with IC. And I know when they diagnosed me with that, and I refused the label. I was like, nope, that's not what this is, because IC is thought to be incurable. And I just could not get behind labeling anybody with a condition that's incurable. But I think that when people are kind of in that category of IC, the thinking is, oh, it's like an autoimmune condition. You can never get rid of it. You're just going to have to figure it out with your pain meds the rest of your life. And it's so awful to be doomed, like labeled with that, I mean, ugh.
So as you've been like working with different clients with this and yourself, have you just been seeing like lowering like the toxicity bucket has been helpful, or is it like really just seeming to go back to mold or parasites for people?
I think it can depend. If it is truly, an infection rather
Mhm.
than just like, I'm going to call it icy. If
Yeah.
it really is, chronic UTI, that sort of thing, then yes, lowering the toxin bucket is huge. However, again, this is where I like muscle testing, because I just don't think there's a lot of labs that are great at pinpointing, first, is this a bacterial infection? Because we just assume UTI is bacterial, but it can be viral. Like there are viral UTIs. It can be, root cause can be many other different things. So that's kind of when you have to go back to that toxin bucket analogy of, okay, well, if it is bacterial, why did that run so rampant? Like, is there
Mhm.
toxicity in the body kind of allowing that to take over? Probably. Spoiler alert, probably. So, yes, there's antibacterial herbals and things. And, there's the whole issue too with chronic UTIs, with biofilms, and
Yes.
how that can be really common. Yeah, if you're the kind of person that you get kind of bladder burning and like the need to pee for a couple of days and then it'll go away and kind of come back, that's where you might want to think, is there something that is hiding? Biofilms are basically your body creating, well, it's not your body creating, sorry, it's the pathogen. So usually it's a bacteria, but it can be other things. creating their own little protective film so that your body's immune system doesn't recognize it. It's how they stay hidden. So it's so stealthy. But I also learned recently that that's also, the biofilm is also how the bacteria or the pathogen, they communicate together. Isn't that gross? Yes.
Yeah.
It's so nasty. So anyway, there's a whole issue of biofilm too. But yeah, going back to root cause, it can definitely be an infection, but if it's not an infection, it's more just icy and inflammation. You don't know why does this happen every once in a while. There are a lot of different things. Yes, toxicity. I know mold loves the bladder. Lyme and all the Lyme co-infections, specifically Borrelia and Bartonella. Those really specifically affect the bladder. So yeah, there's like these different things that you do have to work on the toxin bucket to let the body be able to handle those things.
Yeah. We also had Dr. Miller, who's a pelvic floor therapist, on a few episodes ago, and she was saying too that like the centering of your uterus is so important too for the health of your bladder. And it's just so weird how like it all ties in together.
All connected, yes.
Yeah. There's
and pelvic floor. I'm so glad you brought that up because pelvic floor dysfunction can be a huge contributor. I know we think more about hormones and uterine issues and that kind of thing, but no, to bladder for sure. If your pelvic floor, postpartum, there's a whole lot of work you got to do to kind of retrain those muscles and get them where they need to go, but that's a big thing. Like pelvic floor PT is something that I recommend a lot of my clients just go, have it checked out, look into that for sure. That's that kind of structural side.
Yeah, it all comes together. So are there labs that you like to start with when someone comes to you with IC, or do you dive right into like muscle testing to kind of see where you want to go with that?
So there's not a specific lab that I love for IC. I like to dive into a muscle testing just to kind of start emptying that toxin bucket like we're talking about. But I do think functional blood chemistry analysis can be really helpful too if muscle testing is not your thing. And then I know just my own experience doing different urine analysis, the ones that they do at the ER or at the just kind of regular doctor's office, they're just really outdated. They're just not the best. Have you encountered that?
I have only had like one or two clients with IC, and like they already came in with it, and like we went into like running like stuff with their gut and
more
stuff.
Specialized things. Yeah. Well, and that's another thing too, is that I see a lot of people who have bladder issues almost always have some sort of gut dysfunction. The microbiome is connected. Like the bladder has its own biome. It's not sterile as we used to think. And so if you've got a bunch of stuff going on in your gut, that's probably going to tie into bladder too.
Also, Microbiome Labs just came out with a lab. It's relatively new that talks about can you hold on, sweetie? That talks about the different bacteria in your vagina versus your gut.
Well, that's awesome.
They are, which I think it's new. And they said that you actually want different strains. So especially for people who have like chronic UTIs or just even have them more so than normal, it could be helpful to kind of see what's going on there.
I also see this happen a lot with clients who have, IC or chronic UTI bladder issues. They will often come in too with, frequent yeast infections, which sometimes that makes them think, well, it's because of all the antibiotics, but also sometimes it's BV or different vaginal, I don't necessarily know if it's infection, but it can be infection. But, it's kind of like all the pelvic floor symptoms, all those things. And that's so painful. I think we don't talk enough about those things because it's kind of taboo, and it shouldn't be because, man, it's more common than we realize.
Yeah. And I also, the one where I see this flare up a lot, and it's not even like, I see is around periods. Like I'll
Yeah.
have clients that end their period and they're just like, I feel like I have a yeast infection. That I've always linked back to mold. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's just, I don't know. It just seems to flare up around that time. Maybe it's just because your body's already a little fatigued and needing some more support, etc. But yeah.
Well, I know too, a lot of women who are in like middle age or maybe kind of the perimenopause, even menopause stages of their, kind of hormonal journeys, I will hear a lot of complaints about bladder issues there. And I've seen a couple of research papers that will say that it's because of low estrogen. So sometimes either the estrogen fluctuation or just the dipping of estrogen and the effect of, the thinning. I forget what it is, if it's specifically the thinning of the bladder lining or the vaginal canal, but it's that tissue tends to be thinner when your estrogen is lower kind of later in life. And so that can make you much more susceptible to actual UTIs. But I also think probably just that kind of bladder irritability too.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many things that kind of go into there too, because like, which I didn't even realize this, but like your uterus can get tipped, going through childbirth or even just like using muscles incorrectly. And then, as you head into perimenopause, like sometimes it's not necessarily low estrogen, it's estrogen going down the wrong pathways and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's so tricky sometimes when like when you look at it and you want to say, well, I mean, it's associated with, low estrogen or hormonal, but at the same time, like, is it maybe that your estrogen's off? And so now like your muscle tone is not as great and your uterus isn't staying in position. So it's like, there's so many things that, I talk to my clients about this all the time because it can be frustrating. You're like,
oh, it is.
You uncover one layer and you're like, yes. And you uncover it and you're like, oh my goodness, this is what it was hiding. And it can be so frustrating.
Yeah, it is.
But it's a journey. It's a journey for sure.
You're talking. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, because I'm going to take you on a different path really fast.
Gotcha. I was going to mention too, you were reminding me that I didn't bring in parasites, which I always like to talk about. It grosses people out every time. But there really are, talking about root cause, yes, mold, Lyme, bacteria, viral issues, candida for sure can cause bladder issues, low estrogen, or even just fluctuating estrogen, hormonal things like that, but also parasites. And parasites are something that we don't really talk about, I think, collectively, because we think we're too clean. Yeah. And I tell people when they don't really feel like they believe me about parasites, I'm like, well, do you have a pet? Do you eat vegetables? Like, do you drink water that maybe isn't filtered, like at a restaurant or something? Okay, then you're exposed. And parasites are attracted to a really full toxin bucket. So it's just, it's just part of life that we're going to be exposed to them. However, there is a specific type of parasite that does like the bladder. They're called schistomas. And so the condition is schistомyces. Just so hard to say.
That's a long word.
I know. But yeah, we can, talk about things that can live in the organs that don't need to be there. So this is why I'm a huge fan too of like parasite cleansing being a part of the toxin removal process, so.
Parasites are so gross. Before I was pregnant, I would do like regular coffee enemas, and I'd do the full moon parasite protocol just because I knew I had them, but like didn't really notice them as much before I got pregnant. So I knew like they were getting a little bit better. Yeah, in 1 second, sweetie. But what I just think is hilarious is I'll have people not even on a parasite cleanse, just doing their protocol, but as your body gets stronger, it releases them, and they're like, why are there like white things in my poop? And I'm like, well,
hate to tell you, but
yeah. But we're glad they're getting out, as gross as it is, we do want them to get out.
And
So
that's
we've
an
touched on
amazing
it.
sign that their body is doing its job. Like if you can get
Yes.
somebody healthy enough to where they're naturally fleshing out, that tells me that their liver's doing its job, that their
Mhm.
bowels are doing their job, their digestion, their stomach acid is where it needs to be. Like
Yeah.
that's great.
Because that's how we should all be. Like we
Yeah.
shouldn't have to do parasite cleanses, but like everybody has a parasite, but some people, are very healthy and they're getting rid of them themselves. So that's what we all aspire to be.
We do.
Draw tractor.
Okay, I can draw a tractor. So let's talk about muscle testing because we've touched on it a few times. I use this in my practice and I think it's really useful. But I think sometimes it scares people.
It does. It totally does. Sure. Yeah. So I like to muscle test. I do most of my muscle testing virtually, which confuses people so much. But really what we're doing is we're testing, it's a yes or no. We're testing, is the muscle staying strong in the presence of this supplement or is it weakening? Like, does the body want it? Yes or no? So it's not a woo-woo, crazy, weird voodoo thing like it sounds or can look. It's just asking the nervous system yes or no to something. So I think that can be really helpful, choosing supplements or choosing, if you have a whole bunch of food allergies and you haven't gotten to the bottom, the root cause of it yet, muscle tests can be helpful to walk you through what you should or shouldn't eat to flare, things like that.
Yeah. And I have found it to be really useful for like sensitive patients, especially because you have your typical H. pylori protocol. I feel like so many of my clients have H. pylori.
So common, yeah.
But most of them need different protocols. And so that's where I find it really useful because some of them don't respond well to like the very harsh, aggressive, like go after it. Some of them need a much more gentle approach. So it really just I find it to be useful, but yeah, it's just yes, no questions. It's not and I think the biggest thing is when they notice the different, like they're like, oh my gosh, like that, really worked, especially sometimes too, like with different brands of supplements, like it's the same supplement, but like different companies just process it different. And I'm like, well, you're testing for this one, but you're not testing for the other one.
It's so interesting. And I know for me, at least, because I'd kind of exhausted in my story, I had exhausted all the Western medicine options for my issues. So I was desperate enough to be like, okay, I know this looks crazy, but I'll do it. But I think for me, the buy-in was realizing, no, my body's saying yes or no to this. So my body is wanting these things. So even if I did have like a minor detox reaction or a herx, as we say, to a supplement, I could stay with it because I was trusting that, well, my body's asking for this. Like this is what we're doing. So that helped me feel more committed and feel like I'm really listening to my body rather than just like guessing at a supplement or taking somebody's word for, oh, this is the best supplement for XYZ. You know what I mean? It really makes it more bio-individual.
Definitely. And I also find too that like it also saves a lot of money because, when you look at someone in their situation and their lifestyle and their labs, I'm sure like supplements come to mind. And you're like, oh, like that would be a good protocol for them or this. But then sometimes when I muscle test, their body's like, no, we really don't want that. And, it comes clear as we're going through their protocol that something else cleared it up. So they didn't need both of those things. And so, I just think that I think it saves money, which, is useful for everybody out there.
Definitely. And helpful when you're on a healing journey because, you've got more like the long haul in mind, and so pacing yourself, with all your supplements and things is important.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Dry off.
Okay, I'll dry it off in a second. Okay, so muscle testing goes very well, I think, into emotional affects emotional, I don't want to say trauma, but like emotional roadblocks holding you
Oh,
back from healing. Have you come across this in your practice?
yeah, for sure. It's safe. I work with more chronic illness
Yeah. So sick for a long
clients.
time.
So people who have had mystery symptoms for a long time that they've just been kind of troubleshooting and can't get to the bottom of. So people who've been doing that, I mean, that's traumatic. The
Yeah.
idea that I'm unhealthy and I can't figure it out, and I've seen 10 doctors who all say I look fine, that kind of thing, like that's traumatic. That's so
Yeah.
frustrating. And so I think there's like a whole that can create emotional blockages, I think. So being able to work through that emotional side is huge.
Yeah.
And I think we all think, oh yeah, no, I know. Like I know how to find a therapist. Like I know how to like journal a little bit, but there's a lot. So I really love using things like breath work, and
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm a
Hmm.
big fan of like EFT tapping. I know you and I have talked about that before.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I also really like MBSR. And if you're unfamiliar with that, it's short for mind, body, spirit release. And again, with the muscle testing, I know because that's my thing, that uses muscle testing to see if there are trapped emotions in the body. It's kind of like body code or emotion
Hmm.
code, but you can go a little bit deeper into like traumas and even, generational emotional blocks that maybe you inherited from your mom and things like that, that you can
Yeah.
kind of work through and clear at a more energetic level,
Hmm.
which again, I know this sounds woo woo to be talking about energy, but it's that idea of everything has a frequency.
Yeah.
Any piece of matter in the world has a frequency, and emotions do too. And so they can create blocks in the body, and we need our body to be operating and healthy and well as best we can. So sometimes clearing a blocked, emotional blockage in the body can help us big picture heal a little bit faster, a little bit better.
Yeah. I think that that is um one of the hardest selling points with people, because I will have, patients that have like chronic bloating
Mm-hmm.
or chronic, pain, headaches. And, we go through stuff and I'm like, I really think that we need to focus a little bit more on your stress response, and
Mm-hmm.
like let's talk about some things that keep coming up. And they're like, no, that's not affecting my bloating, that's not why I'm bloated. And I'm like, ah, I kind of think, like, especially with that response even that they have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
you suggesting it, like it's like a guttural, like deep, like don't want to go there, then you're like, we're on to something.
Yeah.
Even though it's it's hard, you just want to be like, tell me to take a supplement, I'll take a supplement.
Yeah. Well, and that's how I was for years and years. I didn't want to look at any of the other stuff because I just have this symptom. It's same with like the whole body idea,
Yes.
like I just like if it's my bladder, I just want to fix my bladder. Why are you telling me I need digestive enzymes and like
Yes.
random supplements that don't have to do with my bladder? But
Mhm.
it's like, no, that's not how the body works. So same with emotions. Like we're not just a physical body. We're a body, but we have, our mind, we have our spirit. Like we're just multifaceted. And so I think the better you can work on all things at once, the faster those symptoms are going to fall away.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just incredible to me that when you get the emotional, like when I have the clients that also will do therapy at the same time, is then we have like the true
Yeah.
winners.
Yeah.
Because you just have all of the tools at your side. And I know, you know when to stay in your lane. I'm like, therapy's not my
Sure.
lane.
For sure.
I can't help you with that. um So, okay. So this is just important because you're a mom and I'm a mom, and I know there's a lot of moms that listen to this. So, how do you do this and be a mom?
Oh, yeah. So I run my practice on my own schedule. I decided that I'm a mom first, and that's going to be my priority. So I'm a practitioner second. So I fit
Yes.
it around my family. And so, yeah, the days that my kids have things are the days that I schedule my work. I know you were mentioning that earlier too. So yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I get asked that all the time. They're like, how do you do this and have a family? And I'm like, well, you don't see like me working during nap times all the time.
Yeah.
Or, like every time, Seb's like, oh, I'll take Landon grocery shopping. I'm like, great, I can get some work done. Because
or I'm sitting at swim team answering client messages in my portal, in my like client portal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And, family comes first, but I also feel like helping other people like fills up my
Definitely.
cup as well. But there was a hard line I drew like when I first started my business, like Landon being on this podcast, is that like my kids are just gonna be involved, because if I try and like have this perfect persona of like
Yeah.
all the things, like, you're not going to hear Landon say, I have to go potty on the podcast. Like I would be editing out so many things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just kind of like real life. But
Yeah.
do you struggle with it at all? Like
I
mentally?
do.
Like
I do a lot. And I feel like I'm getting a little bit better. My kids are a little bit older than yours to where they're school age. And I think that
Yeah.
helps because I know when I need to put, when they're at an activity or a thing, that's when I can
right. And it's
work.
scheduled, which is nice.
But yeah, I do struggle too, because this is a helping thing and I want to help my clients and work with them. And also I'm truly like interested in figuring out what's going on with each of them. I find that I have to put boundaries around my work stuff so it doesn't bleed into my personal stuff, because yes, ideally family comes first, but also I will accidentally work into my family life if I don't
Put that boundary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have that mental problem because like I'll be doing something like whatever, eating dinner, and somebody's case is like stewing in the back of my mind. And then all of a sudden I'm like, that's it. And Seb's like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, well, never mind.
I figured it out. Yeah.
I know. So that is the hardest part for me, is turning it off, because like you don't clock out,
Yeah.
like, so I find that to be hard. Anyways, so for anyone listening who has IC or bladder pain, or maybe wants to do MSBR, did I say that correctly?
MBSR, you were super
MBSR.
Close. Same letters. Yeah.
Whoops. How do they contact you? Like, where are you on all the platforms? I know you have a podcast because I was on it, so we will link that below as well.
Yes. So my website is the Wellness Gahm, and Gahm is spelled like my last name, GAHM.com. And social media wise, I'm really just active on Instagram. My handle is the Wellness Gahm 2.0. And I try to do a lot of teaching and educating there just for free, but also just connecting. I feel like that's a fun way to connect. And then, yeah, I have a podcast and had you on it talking about hormones. And so I love when we can kind of cross-pollinate our ideas and learn from each other. I think that's so cool.
It all comes together. Well, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Balancing Hormones Naturally. If you found this helpful, I would love for you to share it with a friend and post it on your stories and tag Balancing Hormones Naturally podcast so we can get this message out. You can find me on Instagram at Leah_BRUEG, and I would absolutely love to hear from you.